Hi guys, back again, trying to revisit Mono Lake one more time, actually a couple of times. Remember yesterday all you did, you took a virtual field trip uh, to Mono Lake. You watched a short video, 8 minutes and 20 seconds, and all you wanted to see was what was really weird about that ecosystem, and it introduced you to a bunch of the critters that live there. Now, I almost said animals, but if you watch the video, and you're going to see again today, that not all the things that are there actually are animals. So our focus today is going to be pretty simple. We're going to start to look more specifically at the individual organisms that are there. And again, everything's all about interactions. So to do that, we're going to go back. You're going to use organism cards like you've used before in your eco scenarios. And I have them loaded onto our classroom, and they're pretty simple. They'll show you what the critter looks like. They give you its common and scientific name, and then they tell you here all about its life cycle, where it lives, what it does. And most importantly, its relationships and its interactions, like how it gets its food, from who, from where, and by its description, what is its role or its job in the ecosystem? What is it doing? There's a word for that we're going to see in a few days called a niche or a niche for that guy. So you're going to use these organism cards just like you've done before to do that. Now, the cards are going to be, I just put some screenshots on here. Like I said, it'll show you a picture of the critter. In this case, you can see a brine fly. They're mentioned in the video yesterday. And on the backs of the cards, as you scroll down, obviously we're not in school, we can't see the cards in real life. It tells you all about what those things eat, what eats them, where they live, how they reproduce, and then there even are some others further down, other information about them. So you're going to spend some time examining those cards, gathering information, and then creating a visual today. You're going to draw one to show all the relationships. So just to get you thinking about that, I picked two things here, spiders and flies, that are not at Mono Lake. I didn't want to use Mono Lake examples, but I wanted to use this to show you what we mean by relationships here. Because you're probably already very familiar. You've already used this idea of feeding relationships a lot in earlier assignments. So think about spiders and flies, and then, okay, obviously, do they have a relationship, and which organism eats the other one? So here's my really, really bad picture of a spider and a really, really bad picture of a fly. Now, everyone's seen these. You have them, I'm sure, in your house somewhere, in your basement, your attic, underneath a deck or something, out in a shed. And I'm sure you know that spiders eat flies. Spiders build a web, the flies fly into them, spiders wrap them in a cocoon, and then they consume their insides. So we could either, if we could actually write that out in words right here and describe it all, but you know me, and like we said in science, many times a visual, a diagram, or a model is way better. So rather than write it all out, we can draw an arrow, like right here, to show feeding relationships. Now, this feeding relationship, the arrow, notice, is going from the fly to the spider. That shows that the fly gets eaten by the spider. We never want to have the arrow going this way, because that would show us, if the arrow were pointing towards the fly, that would mean that the spider gets eaten by the fly. And we know that's not the case. So this little simple arrow here shows a feeding relationship. And I'm going to have you end up doing the same things here in a few minutes. So you're going to go back to your cards, and you're going to look for feeding relationships like that. Feeding relationships between different critters, different organisms at Mono Lake, and try to establish and show what would they look like. So like, for example, yesterday in the video, they mentioned California gulls and brine shrimp, and you saw that California gulls eat brine shrimp. So we can show that relationship just by plopping a little arrow in here. So I'm going to ask you guys to do the same thing. You're going to get the cards. Now, you're not going to have them on the table because obviously we're not in school, but I'm going to ask you to examine the cards, gather all the information about what organism eats what, and I'm going to give you a way to sort that. Then you're going to create the visual representation using arrows. I'm going to ask you to sketch that in a notebook. So to do that, I've posted a Google Doc on our classroom that looks like this. I'm going to ask you in a notebook to quickly just recreate this table. Just 4 columns, list the organisms. Remember, there's 12 of them here. A little column so you can put, like, what does the brine fly? What does it eat? What eats it? What does it get eaten by? And if there's any other important abiotic information that you need. So I'm going to ask you to recreate, and it's important you do this because you're going to need this table for the next several days. We're going to go back to it again and again. But ask you, this is just a place to pull all that information off the cards because there's a lot of stuff on the cards, get it into one useful table. Then, after you've done that, I'm going to ask you to draw in your notebook all of these relationships, just using arrows. You don't have to actually draw the critters, just put their names, Caspian tern, California gull, and then start to draw those arrows to show these relationships here. Now, when you do that, I'm going to want you to make sure that everything has to eat, right? Everything needs food. So you should have in your notebooks, in your diagram, you're going to try to draw all 12 organisms listed, and many of them will have two or more than one relationship. So there's going to be kind of a lot of arrows. I want you to try your best to show all of them, as many as you can. Now, when we say that, what you're actually creating with these is you're creating a food chain. And that's just a diagram that shows with arrows the path that food takes from one critter to another. So I've shown a simple one here that's not Mono Lake, just one you'd find like in woods or grassy fields here um, here in New England. And notice that we have grass gets eaten by grasshopper. Then the arrow goes to the frog eats the grasshopper, and then the snake eventually eats the frog. So this is like a chain. They're linked together like in a straight line. That's a food chain. Now, I'm going to ask you to create the same thing. You don't need to draw them. You can just write their names. And for now, don't worry about these words, primary consumer, secondary consumer. We're going to go over those next time. For now, I want you just to list all of your organisms from Mono Lake and then try to draw in the arrows to show what eats what. Pretty simple. But there's one little catch here in that when you connect all the organisms with the arrows are going to go crazy. They're going to have things that eat three or four different organisms. You're going to have some things that eat the same type of organism, and it gets a little more complex. It's going to get tangled, and it won't be nice straight lines in a chain. It's going to end up creating a web. It'll be a little bit complicated, but this is just practice here, trying your best. I'm going to ask you again to complete the table from the cards, then draw out your web. All right, and then we're going to go further the next day. So again, our goal is to examine the cards, jot down the information in the tables, and then I want you to try to draw out a web, kind of like a chain like this, but with arrows going in all different directions to show all the feeding relationships at Mono Lake. All right, so we'll know we're satisfied today if you can draw out a web for the 12 critters at Mono Lake. I think you guys can do that, and I'm going to stop and let you